Hey everyone, this is Ron, your host of Ham Radio Heavyweights, a show where I interview influential people in ham radio who have either directly or indirectly allowed ham radio to positively improve their lives and made them more successful. And today I have an awesome guest with me, John Martina, K3NXU, the creator of the popular radio resource website called Miklor.com. Mickler.com boasts of over 75,000 visits per month, helping folks learn about various radios and radio-related products. It's a fantastic resource. John is a retired engineer from Verizon Wireless. He also worked as an IT manager and a web designer. He holds extra-class amateur radio privileges, and he lives in York County, Pennsylvania. Hey, John, welcome to Ham Radio Heavyweights.
All right, it's good to be with you this afternoon.
It sure is glad to be with you as well. I've been looking forward to this interview because I've known about your website for quite a while, and I've watched it grow over the last several years. You're just tearing it up, putting out content, and looking at the traffic and seeing all the reviews that you're doing is pretty incredible. And you've definitely put yourself on the radar in a lot of people's eyes because of the amount of content you're putting out. So before we get into Miklor.com, I want folks to, and myself, I want us to learn about who you are and where you came from. And, starting off with most of my guests, I asked, well, when did you get your ham radio license and how old were you?
Oh, well, I got my ham radio. Let's start from the beginning. I learned CW when I was 12 years old. And then 14 years old, I finally buckled down and got my license. That was my novice license back at 14. And one of the incentives was when I went to school, there were several boys in my class that they were in the Boy Scouts. And their thing was, back then was, learning CW and Morse code used to drive my teachers in school crazy because when we used to pass notes, they were all in code and they could never encrypt it. We knew what we were saying. And then they would say, what is this saying? And then we'd make something up. But that's how my start in CW was passing notes back and forth with some of the Boy Scouts in school.
Well, and what was your WPM? Did you get to it at 12 years old or 12 or 14?
Well, 12 years old, I got my novice. I was maybe about 7 or 8 words a minute back then. But it was fun. It was an enjoyable start. And like I say, 12 years old. I've got a grandson right now. He's 15. And he told me, he says he comes over here. He's fascinated by the radios. And also, he was hoping by last Christmas that he would buckle down to get his license. But between the COVID and learning at school and other projects, he told me, so I really wanted to show you by Christmas I was going to get my ticket. I've got a feeling by this year he's going to have his license.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was pretty ecstatic. I had, at the time, my 2 sons were like 14 or maybe 13 and 15, and I was able to encourage them. They were homeschooled at the time, and they got theirs as well. And they went through a 2-week class, so that was about the time. So it is pretty cool. Definitely a ticket for learning, for sure. So who got you into ham radio?
Well, actually, my father got me interested in ham radio, but got my license before he did. At that time, he had an old Hammerland, Helicrafters, an S38E. And I used to tune around with his little Helicrafter 7-tube receiver. And I picked up on it and got my license. And after I got mine, it took him about a month later, he started practicing the code and he got his. His call was K3WLK. Of course, he's silent key now, but he was my inspiration. But then again, it ran in the family because after I got my ticket, his brother, my Uncle Ben, the 2 of them were in CB together. And he said, well, I'm going to get my ham license. So my uncle got his, then his son, my cousin got his. As time moved on, my wife got her license. And we used to talk back and forth. I'd have a radio in the car, and we said, well, how about the 2 kids? So they had their license. At one time, we had 8 members of the family, all of us ham operators at the same time.
That's really cool. So about when was this? How long time back?
Well, it was back in the day. Let's put it this way. When I got my ticket, it wasn't a matter of how long did it take to get it in the mail. It was how long did it take the guys to engrave it in the granite. I got my ticket in 1961.
Oh, wow.
And what's interesting is when I got my ticket, I was 14 years old. I was 14 years old. And I always thought the guys at the QCWA, these guys were in their 40s and 50s. And I think these are a bunch of old men. I look back now and they weren't so old.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot of folks in that era that are still, they're the role models,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you've grown with your ham radio, I wanted to find out if it played a role in your career path, and if not directly, did it affect your career choices?
It did, Ron. It did in many cases.
Okay.
As far as my background was both in cellular engineering and also was in information technology. And the reason information technology is when I graduated from high school, in the counselor's office, they had a thing where companies nearby would send in requests, and if you had a resume, you could forward the resume. And I saw, I was in an engineering high school, and all of a sudden I get a resume request from Hopkins University in the computer science area. And I went, what has that got to do with my mechanical engineering background? So I went for the interview. I was hired and asked the gentleman, this is why, I'm just curious, is with all the other kids in engineering, why did you pick me? He said, well, I noticed on the bottom of your resume, it had here that one of your hobbies was ham radio.
Oh, wow.
I says, did that influence your decision? He says, oh, yeah, I saw Bud Graves, W3DOT. That's how I got my job at Hopkins, was the fact that I had my ham license. And he figured anybody that can study a ham radio license and get it at age 14, it's like a person he wanted in computers, as a computer trainee. And that's how I got my start. So it played a part. And that was the beginning of a 20-year career in information technology.
Well, there you go. If there was an incentive to get an amateur radio license, that's it. That's it. Sure. So you said you went to, you were in an engineering high school. I've not heard of that. What's that about?
Well, I went to Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, which was an engineering high school, and it's still one of the highest rated high schools here in Baltimore. I say Baltimore, that's where I'm from originally.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the highest rated engineering college or high schools, to the point where if you graduated from the A course, you could actually be accepted in your sophomore year of college. I, at the time, didn't have the money, and my parents didn't have the money to be able to afford me to go to college. So, but I found out that once I worked there, they had a program where if you were an employee of the university, they would pay for your tuition to attend classes. I figured, well, and at that time they had what was called McCoy College. It was an evening school. So they figured if you took work during the day, you could take one or two classes in the evening. It didn't take too long before I applied for the night shift in operations. And guess what I did during the day? And all the tuition was paid for by Hopkins. So that was a good run.
Absolutely.
But that was the first part. That was the IT background. The other half is the cellular background, and that's a story all its own.
Well, yeah, let's jump into your professional career because you worked as an engineer, you say, from Verizon Wireless. That's a pretty impressive operation. So tell me about that. How did you get there?
Well, one day, as I was in the computer operations side, I was outside by the elevator, and I met a friend of mine who was also a ham and informed me that on the roof of the building, they had a cell site. So he said, why don't you come up? I'll show you what's up on the roof. So I went up to take a look at it. He said, sometimes we're looking for engineers. He said, sometimes it could take 6 months. He said, sometimes it could take 6 weeks, but we're always looking for engineers. He said, why don't you put a resume in? I submitted my resume. A week later, I got a call in for an interview, and it was probably the shortest interview I've ever had in my entire life. And I owe it to ham radio. When I went in there, the interviewing questions were, well, you're working on transmitters and receivers, things of this nature. He says, let me ask you a quick question. If I double the power, what does that mean to you? I said, you just gained 3 decibels. He said, well, how about 10 times the power? I said, you just gained 10 dB. He said, what's an FM noise floor mean to you? I said, -90. He said, have you ever worked on any equipment? I said, Hewlett-Packard, WaveTech, IFR, Cushman. He said, what do you know about cables? I said, I know you use all the F550A. He said, I got one more question to ask you. He said, what's that? And he says, can you start on Monday? Exactly. That guy's working with me now for 3 years that don't know the answers to those questions. And that was the beginning of a 7-year run with Verizon Wireless.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I've got a story I just heard of a young man that, he wanted to work for the Union Pacific Railroad, and they were looking for computer science people, but he's an electrical engineer, and because he had the ham radio background, he was able to beat out everybody. And your story echoes that. It seems like it's the hidden key or something that these guys are looking for.
I always said the ham radio license was a license to learn.
Yes, yes. That's awesome. So you spent 7 years with Verizon, and what did you like most about working as an engineer?
Well, what I liked most about it was, I guess, the flexibility and I always was a tinkerer, and I had, working there. Well, my background being with transmitters, receivers, and duplexers, things of that nature, it fell right into place with the things that were mentioned at the interview. And what I liked most about it was when I got into, in fact, they weren't Verizon Wireless at the time. They were still known as Bell Atlantic Mobile. That was before the big split where Bell Atlantic was getting too big and they had to divide it up. So, but what I liked about it most was the fact that when I got there, they were just moving into what was called the digital transition. When I started with Verizon Wireless, everything was FM. Your handhelds and all little Motorola FM flip phones.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about the integration was we had to keep it in total secrecy. We could not let anyone, including the people in the phone stores, know that we were going into the digital transition. And the reason for that was if the competition found out, who at that time was Sprint, Alltel, and a few others, they would turn up the gas and try to beat us to the punch. So we had to swear secrecy to the point that when we went to the phone stores and we had these little Qualcomm digital transceivers on our belt, the guys got all excited. They said, "Oh, you're testing out digital. How close are we?" I said, "Not even close." I said, "What we're doing is we're testing the FM side to make sure these things even work." I said, "Digital's probably a long way into the future." And then 2 weeks later, we turned up the entire network. And the guys in the phone store were a little upset. He said, "Why could you trust us?" I said, "Because we can't trust you." If we had told them we were close, then anytime someone from another vendor would have come in, so you don't want to go with them. We're turning up digital soon. Then they would have gone back to Sprint or whoever, passed the word on that we're turning up digital. So we said, no, we were sworn to secrecy to the point where we were told, if you leak it, you lose your job. That was enough incentive for a lot of us.
So this was close to 20 years ago when 3G was being rolled out, wasn't it?
That's exactly what it was. It was the initial integration of 3G, and our division in Maryland was responsible for the state of Maryland, Eastern Shore of Maryland, and Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. We had a big territory, but we did it.
And that was all on 800, wasn't it? Or
Yes.
You were going spread spectrum and like you said, that there was 3 different modes: CDMA, TDMA, and GSM. And they were buying out all the 800 LTR systems, or they were, and that's when, it was going from analog to digital, and that was when I remember the shutoff date when analog was no longer a thing in the cellular world.
Yeah, it was an interesting transition. Loved every minute of it, but
so
it was
you were a part of that.
We were part of it. Our group,
wow.
And we were doing drive testing. I'd have the vice president of the corporation in my vehicle as we were going around testing. The thing was then it was seamless coverage. He said if we detected, I had all the instrumentation on the dash, and if we hit a spot where we lost a signal, put up a cell site. And those cell sites back at that time were upwards to $1 million a piece. But they went to seamless coverage. If you went up whether you went up Interstate 83 or up Interstate 95, didn't matter. If there was a dead spot, they put in a cell site. And at that time, it was a major investment. When I say major investment, they were hoping everything would come together, and it came together beautifully.
Yeah. So you were a field test guy then, where you fed back to the engineering staff, and they would of course make the adjustments and performance, etc.
Yes, I was out in the field for about 3 years, and at that time, now your test equipment runs maybe, it's they're a pound and a half. I mean, they're these little boxes. Back then, when I was with Verizon, the average test set weighed about 30 or 40 pounds. And I was at one site where I was taking the equipment up to a roof. It was a rooftop site. Got halfway up the ladder, and that was it. I froze because my back went. Oh. And I took my time. It took me a half hour. I made it up the ladder. I got the cell site, but got the equipment rather up on the roof. And I was told at that time, he said, John, you should have just dropped it. And I said, but in my heart, I can't drop a $50,000 Hewlett Packard. He said, but they're insured. Well, the bottom line was, I told him, I says, I can't do this anymore. I said, hopefully I didn't want to go on unemployment. I said, I want to do something. And he said, well, we have a position inside in the equipment engineering side. So I took it. And that was the last 4 years. Instead of installing the equipment, I was coordinating the installation of the antennas and the equipment. My group there was 4 of us in our group, and we coordinated everything from there. So that's how I went from the engineering outside to the inside engineer.
Now, was that an HP 8924C?
Oh gosh, you're asking me to dig back quite a ways, but yeah, it sounds like it could be close. It was, it was completely set up for CDMA, power level test. I mean, it was everything in one. Yeah.
Well, I've got one of those actually. It's an 8924C and it's a CDMA set. And when you said HP, I was wondering if that was what it was, because it has all the LMR functionality in it for two-way radio, which is really cool. But it was made it was designed for CDMA. So what did you like the least about all that, if I may ask? Your job.
If I had to say the least was probably the driving.
Okay.
When I got the position, I live up in York, Pennsylvania, and my territory started in Northern Maryland, which was about 5 miles away. When I went with the inside engineering position, that was down near Laurel, Maryland. That's 2 hours away. So for 4 years, I had a 2-hour drive to work and a 2-hour drive back. What they did for me was they did change my time, where I could start an hour and a half before everyone else. And they were able to, and I could leave an hour and a half earlier. Constantly went through a battle with the managers because people were saying, I want to go on his schedule. But the reason they did that is if I left an hour and a half early, I'd get to work in an hour and get home in an hour. Because being down near Washington, D.C. and having to travel up near past Baltimore to Pennsylvania, that's a brutal drive during rush hour. So, but that's probably what I liked the least, was the drive. As far as working there, it's a great place to work. Great guys. A lot of them were ham operators, and there was always a good lunchtime conversation.
Awesome. So, before we get into your current project, what was the best engineering project that you enjoyed about working as an engineer?
I would say it was the digital transition, because it was a matter of, when you say doing the drive testing. I've always been a curiosity type person. I've always wanted to see what make it tick. And the fact that if there were little things, whether it was antennas or cables or whatever, if there was a problem during the installation, to me, that was fun. That was the enjoyable part, was doing the diagnostic work. But I'd say that was probably the most enjoyable thing, was going through that transition and seeing that whole network turn up that day, and it went up flawlessly.
Well, I do remember that when the cell phone industry went to digital, and then of course about 10 years later, that's when the land mobile radio industry went digital, or at least they were supposed to go narrow band, and of course the technology to do that was promoted as being digital, even though you didn't have to go digital. But that was where many of the major players in like Kenwood, ICOM, Motorola, they promoted digital related products. So yes, and that's why we're enjoying DMR at this point, is because of that migration towards digital as by the FCC. Well, anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say, at that time, there were only 3 digital modes. One was CDMA, and the other was TDMA, and the third was GSM. And of course, TDMA, at that time, it was tier 1, but that's what became tier 2, and that's what we're using today on DMR.
Yeah, it is. It all came out of that. Well, let's get into your baby, Miklor.com. This is how you got on the map here with the amateur radios. interest. So how did Miklor.com come about?
Originally, Miklor was a website. It was a family website. And what it did, I had pictures of family albums and my cars and things of this nature. And that goes back to around 2006. Miklor is actually composed of my two children's names, Michael and Lori. And I wanted something a little bit different. So I said, well, how about Miklor? And again, it was a family site where we put up, vacation pictures, things of that nature. And then I put a section of it when I was just starting back into ham radio, because I took a hiatus for about 10 years. When I came back into ham radio, one of the big things was people were buying these the little Chinese transceivers, and they were having trouble, as you probably heard a million times. My programming cable doesn't work, and it was a bad driver. Had to do with the prolific chip copies. And I figured, so many people are asking the same question. I put together a little 2-page section on the website on the cables and the drivers. And then somebody would ask a question about that, and it kept evolving. Right now, it's a 450-page monster that requires full-time attention. but I love every bit of it. But it started as a two-page website describing drivers for radios. Now it got into, now with reviews and everything else. As you mentioned, according to the statistics counter, it gets about 3,000 page views a day worldwide. And my email box sometimes gets a little bit flooded in the morning, but it's all part of the hobby.
Yeah. Well, it's impressive. It's impressive what you've done. 450 pages of content, going from 2 pages in 2012 over just a cure for a driver. I mean, it's impressive, now to sitting at 450 pages. And, just for the viewers, check out Miklor.com. It's full of information about all these radios you might see out there. John has done a phenomenal job of going through reviews or doing reviews on radios, and it's a phenomenal resource. So you're promoting not only ham radio, but you've got GMRS stuff in there. You've got product reviews, technical resources. Just give us a snapshot of all the content that's on the site.
Well, it started off strictly on the ham radio, and then when DMR kicked in, I started putting everything together. The site got to be too scattered. If someone was looking for information on FM or the analog side, there was digital stuff thrown in. So I split it off, and I have a digital side and an analog side. One addresses more the line of setting up hotspots, things of that nature on digital. The other is programming the analog radios. And now that GMRS is becoming more and more popular, much more popular than it was 4 or 5 years ago, I split it off again to a GMRS side. So I don't have a lot of radios on there. I've only got maybe about 4 or 5 at this time, and a couple mobiles. But I figured I'd split it up into 3 different divisions. But radio itself is catching on, whether it's ham radio, whether it's GMRS. I imagine there's, I don't cover a lot in the FM or the FRS and MERS side, but primarily the GMRS ham radio side. GMRS is picking up quite a bit.
Yeah, we're seeing wins of that as well happening. It's interesting because people are. I think that's due to a lot of the prepper. The prepper community is adopting GMRS, and it's a lot easier to get a license than to just take a test. You can just pay a fee and you're on the air. It's some decent power. Yes, so,
and now with a 10-year license and everyone in the family can use it.
Yeah, it's
a good stepping stone because a friend of mine started off with GMRS and liked it. And he was fascinated by it, and he got his license. So it's a good stepping stone.
It is.
People say, well, one's better than the other. That's like saying an F-150 pickup truck is better than a car. It depends on what your need is.
Yes.
They're two totally different licenses, 2 totally different spectrums, but they do tie together.
So how do you determine what you put on your website? I mean, what governs all that? Is it just,
It's primarily by questions that I see coming up periodically on Facebook, or somebody will send me a question, they'll email it to me. And if I get the same question over and over again by 4 or 5 different people, rather than answer the question, I figure I'll answer the question, but I'll put a section together on the website and put it under that category. For instance, when someone asked me the other day, I'd seen 3 or 4 people talking about the bit error rate on a hotspot. How do I get the bit error rate down? So I put a section together on how to adjust the 5-star to adjust it to, adjust the bit error rate to keep it down. And now it's just one more reference. If anyone says, or anyone should ask the question, I just refer them to the site. So that's where I get most of my content. Most of my content comes from people that have asked me similar questions. And if it's a recurring question, it's valid for the website.
Well, that's key. You're solving a lot of problems.
Well, believe me, I am not hurting for a lack of potential material.
We'll probably have to call you after the interview. There's always a problem to be solved for sure. But yeah,
absolutely.
Do you do all these product reviews yourself? Speaking of the reviews that you're doing, because, folks, there's a lot of reviews on this website that John has put together. And are you doing them all yourself?
Yes. Again, it's part of the hobby. It's I see a radio, I like it. It looks. Sometimes I'll see one on eBay that it might be one there. Somebody may have. I've never heard of that one before. I'll read the specs. I'll buy it, review it, put it on the website. Other times I'll see, there might be a specific DMR radio that's becoming popular. I'll buy it, review it. I have a shelf downstairs, Ron. It's a 6-foot shelf. It's about 3 feet wide, 6 foot high, 1.5 feet deep. These are the boxes, and they're radios and boxes of just the radios that I buy, because once I buy them, I hold on to them for at least a year or so. That way, if someone has a question and said, I can't get mine to do this, I'll bring the radio out, put it on a supply, and, I'll go through it myself just to answer the question. But my wife was getting on my case. She said, John, you've got to look at what you've got downstairs. That's a 6-foot shelf, and the thing is full. You've got to do something. So I did the only logical thing. I went out and bought another shelf. Now I have 2 shelves.
Yeah, I could tell a joke right now, but I won't. Yeah. So are you actually reading the owner's manuals of all these radios and actually, going through the feature set and just confirming, or how exhaustive of a test do you conduct?
A lot of it I usually read the manual. I'm one of the individuals. I read the manual as a very last resort. And unfortunately, a lot of the manuals, or maybe it's fortunate that I do that, because a lot of the manuals that come with some of the radios that are imported, it's not because they don't want to, it's because the manuals are incomplete.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll go through every function, and I'll walk through the menu myself and test them. There are some manuals are very complete, some are but I've already helped. There are a couple of vendors where I've actually written or co-written the user manual. And you may see on some of the radios where it says contributor, Miklor.com. I'll go through and not rewrite the manual, but contribute to that manual just so it is understandable. But most of the time when I get a radio, I just go through the menus and, go through function at a time. If it's I've got my Bird terminal line over here, I think was calibrated last year. Small spectrum analyzers, and I'll go through and do the wattage test, over-the-air test. It takes about 2 weeks. When I get a radio, it takes about 2 weeks to really go through it and putting it on the air and getting to audio test before I'll even attempt to put the review together. I try to go through them as thoroughly as I can. And I never compare one radio against another because it's an individual thing. A radio that I might like might not be good for you, or something that you might like might not be for me. So I take each radio and review it and judge it for exactly what it is by itself. And then whoever reads it, the review, they have to make the choice. I very seldom, if ever, compare one against the other.
So are you comparing your review analysis with the marketing specification or what the product spec boasts of, and just confirming or saying, hey, yeah, I can confirm that these feature sets are there and they work? Or are you vetting the radio for the marketplace in a way at this point?
Well, what happens in some cases, I look at the specifications, and if it says it's a 25-watt radio, I'll put it on the test set and say, okay, it's 25-watt radio. I'm showing 22.3 watts. I'll do it for the, I test out as far as the power, as far as functionality, as far as, what kind of current it draws, the things of this nature. And then, and this is when my wife says, I don't know why you do this. I do it because I've already had radios that come through and it said, this is IP67 graded, waterproof. After I do the testing, as you can guess, I take the radio, I put it in the tub, I sink it in about 2 foot of water and walk away for a half hour and come back. And if I turn it on, I report on it. Sometimes I turn the radio on, crystal clear. I've had some where you turn it on, it's muffled. It takes about a day for it to dry out, and then it's better. And I've had some that didn't return. And unfortunately, that's what I put in the website. I mean, quite honestly, just because it says IP67, it's got to withstand anywhere up to 16 to 18 inches of water for a half an hour. And if it passes the test, that's good by me. So, I've had a couple of radios that ended up being doorstops when I got done testing.
So what kind of products do you like reviewing the most? Are handhelds, mobiles, test equipment, infrastructure, where power supplies?
Not too much test equipment. I've only got about 3 or 4 different power supplies. In fact, I have one section on the website regarding power supplies, and it differentiates between switching supplies and your regular heavy transformer supplies. But I don't really review them. Mostly it's handhelds and mobiles. A little bit of test equipment, but handhelds and mobiles, and mobile and I guess quite a few mobile antennas. I've got about 12.5 different antennas downstairs. Each one different. Some of them are good for the roof of the car. Some of antenna mounts, but primarily it's mobiles and handhelds. More handhelds than you can imagine. In fact, I could probably open up a store and compete with you. Just based on what's on the shelf. Now, I think downstairs I've got somewhere around 33 or 34 different handhelds, analog and DMR. And again, I'm waiting for a Hamfest. A lot of them will go at a Hamfest, and then I'll take that and I'll buy more.
Yeah, that's awesome. So taking all this testing that you're doing on these radios, let's just step back. You were an engineer, doing verification on this cellular network transition. I mean, is this a skill that all this comes back to your ham radio roots? It looks like. Well,
yes. I've always wanted to see what made it tinker, or what made it tick. I've always been curious. I built my first transmitter when I was 14 years old. Only because I wanted to see if all these things, grids, tubes, cathodes, plates, and all, what this was all about. And that's how I learned. To see what makes it tick. And then out of curiosity and digging into things, when I was in information systems, I had a reputation. I was called the Demolition Man. And because I would tinker and I would dig into things, whether it was software or whatever, I would dig into it. And I could make anything fail. And my job at one company I worked with for 3 years, they would take software that they had developed that was bulletproof, guaranteed this software will work flawlessly. There's nothing that can break it. They would give it to me, and my job was to take down the shield and find out where it could break. If it got past me, it worked. And I'd say probably 75% or more of the quote unquote bulletproof software had to go back but that was my nature. I dig into things. I want to find out what makes it tick, but that's how I got the reputation of the Demolition Man many years ago.
That's cool. So you're writing a lot. So you probably did a lot of technical writing as an engineer as well. And that's now played a pivotal transition to this website and all your writing efforts.
Yes, that was one of the major courses in the engineering side. And development was the technical engineering side. Technical writing side, once you found out something, to put a manual together and describe it. And yes, I was a tech writer for a while too. That's one of the reasons why it was an easy transition for me to help some of the companies put together their user manuals and operations manual. And with a website, what I try to do is I really try not to get too wordy. Just because something's there to describe this happens because this happens, it makes that happen. The average person just wants to get the radio working. So this is what's happening. Here's what it takes to make it work. 1, 2, 3. Here's a diagram, and go. I try to keep my reviews as simple and to the point as possible.
That is a valuable skill, to keep things simple and to write technical, what can be complicated ideas, and making them simple and easy to understand, and being able to write that for sure. And the website and the reviews that John has done has a lot of this skill set on display. So I definitely encourage you guys to check out Miklor.com for any radio that you might be interested in, because he definitely has done a bang up job in terms of writing quality reviews from a very objective point of view. What is the biggest challenge of maintaining that website at this point? Because it's grown so much.
Biggest challenge is actually time.
Okay.
I've been asked in a couple instances, would I consider doing a YouTube series? And you can't serve two masters. If I did YouTube videos, the website would have to, you have to pick and choose. If I did one, I probably wouldn't have enough time to do the other. So I only want to serve one master at this point. And right now, the dedication is to the website itself. Yeah,
notice your format on the website it's very simple. I mean, it's a no frills, just basic, hyperlinks to the various reviews. You've definitely kept it simple and easy to maintain, it looks like.
Well, I had to reformat it, I guess about 6 months ago, because I started just adding things to the end. And it got to the point where you started off in one area, and then you just had to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. So I started categorizing it. I did a reformat of the main page about 6 months ago. And I've been told that it's a lot easier to read, a lot easier to follow. So, but that's one of the biggest challenges of the website, is the time involved. It's to the point where I really don't spend as much time on the air as I would like to. And I've had an interesting career back in ham radio, and I went dormant for about 10 years when I was at Verizon Wireless. In fact, I had to try to remind myself to renew my license. I was sold everything I had for about 10 years. And the reason was, I would come home from work, and my wife got me at Verizon. She says, well, why don't you get on the radio and, relax? I says, 8 hours a day, I'm working on transmitters, receivers, duplexers, combiners, cables. And I said, the last thing I want to do is come home and get on the radio. I didn't even want to use a cell phone at the time.
Yeah.
So I took about a 10-year hiatus. Now I'm starting to get back into it again more and more.
Well, you certainly are helping a lot of people for sure with your website. It's a heck of a resource. So you're working with a lot of vendors in the marketplace now, and as a result, do you directly or indirectly offer ideas, feature enhancements to any of these vendors for new products?
Yes, I'm fortunate enough that I've had vendors recognize what I do, and they'll send me a radio and they'll say, "No, this is about to go out." They'll send them to me not in the beta stage. Some are actually in the alpha stage, where they're putting it together. They want to find out what the flaws are on the radio, whether it's overheating, things of this nature. So a few alphas, quite a few betas. And the betas, when I find, you go through, and I'm glad they send a beta, because I get a chance to go through it, find out what the flaws are, let them know, and give them a chance to correct it. If they can come back within a reasonable amount of time and correct it and say, well, our engineers are looking at it. By the time I write the review, that's what's in the review. There is a flaw, and I was told it will be fixed. When it's fixed, I'll update the review. But I call them like they are. I've had vendors already say, please do not print the review. I said, I can't do that. I said, I won't say don't buy the radio, but what I will do is I'll put the review out and say it has these flaws, and engineering knows about it. I've also had companies say, here's the radio. What can I add to it to make it better and make it more ham radio friendly? I've had that happen. And apparently I've gained I'd say the respect. I've gained the reputation of doing a thorough job. And that's what I owe to, again, I had some good mentors, and this is my way of paying it back to ham radio. I'm not going to sit there and sugarcoat it. I call them like they are. Yeah.
No, they're good, well-written reviews, definitely. So yeah, Miklor.com. So where do you see the website going in the next few years? Do you think you'll need an additional support staff? You say you're the only guy. I mean, you see these grandkids getting involved, or maybe a family member that's going to get licensed soon?
Well, like I say, my grandson, he's taken an active interest in it. And I mean, he was, oh gosh, when he was 10 years old, he wanted something. I said, I'll buy it for you and help you. But he bought it when he was 10 years old. He bought a little Arduino, and he's sitting there with the plug boards, putting the circuits in and watching the LEDs flash and working on the computer with the timers. He did that for, he was, oh God, he was 10 years old. My son, I like to encourage people. I'll show them what to do, but I won't do it for them. In fact, this grandson now, the one that wants a ham license, I had worked when I was in IT. We had extra computers. We used to keep as backup computers. And when we brought in the new models, we had a couple spares in. I was able to bring them home. They said, dispose of them. And a couple of them I donated to a local church. They needed one, but one of them went to my grandson. He was 3 years old. And at 3 years old, he was moving the icons around, and he grew up with a computer. He's never known not having one. So with his background right now with computers, there's no doubt in my mind he's going to be in the computer area, software-wise. Right now, he likes game development.
Oh,
but
yeah.
He also likes the ham radio side, so I can see him being the fourth generation.
So any advice for anyone who might be interested in starting a resource website like you're doing or you've done? Yeah.
As far as doing a resource website, there's a need for resource websites out there. But back at, was it 1962, I think it was. There was a gentleman who was running for president, H. Ross Perot. And he was an entrepreneur. He started the major computer consulting company. And he said something a while back, and I'll never forget. He says, the reason for his success is you master an industry, find the void, and fill the void. And he's absolutely right. Anyone who wants a successful website, if they want to do it on radios, don't review radios that are already been reviewed 25 times. Find something new, find something different, find something that's of interest. And if there's a void, like it was with the old handhelds, there was a problem, the drivers. So I wrote about the drivers, and it grew from there. So if somebody wants to find a website, regardless whether it's radios, whether it's lawnmowers or whatever, pick it up, pick an industry, master the industry, find the void, and fill the void, and that'll be a successful website. Or YouTube channel, same thing.
Well, that leads me to ask you, because this whole website has grown organically. Is that true? You're not paying for traffic or anything like that. This is all just people are finding you, and it's organic.
It has grown strictly through word of mouth, through Facebook, I was amazed when I started doing statistics counters and seeing it was going up and up and up. And it's like, why? But apparently it's been used as a reference, for different clubs, presentations. I was asked once to do could I put together a presentation for a club? And that's when I put together with a DMR 101. I called it the DMR tutorial. That started off as a presentation for a local radio club. And I've since put it on a website. And then I received requests, can I use your presentation for our club? Absolutely. Anything that's on there is not copyrighted. I mean, as far as if somebody wants to take it and make a copy of it, use the presentation, the DMR slide, not DMR, the PDF slide presentations on the club presentation, they're more than welcome to do it. It's all part of my way of giving back to the hobby.
That's awesome. Yeah, keep that in mind, folks. He's got a lot of resources there that can help you in your club. Oh, when you brought up Perot, it prompted me to think about, because he's a master entrepreneur, and I was thinking about how your website has become I don't think of it like as a business, but it filled a void to your point, and yet you probably could monetize all these efforts to where this is like a second career, and that's what I noticed about it the most, was just the fact that this idea has morphed into such a large resource, Well,
as far as monetizing it, basically there's a little link on there that says if somebody wants to donate a couple dollars, that's fine. I haven't gone out and bought a Porsche yet, so but there's a donation on there, and also the only monetization of all is the little Amazon links on the right hand side. If somebody goes to one of the Amazon links and clicks on it, and then they buy a radio, Amazon says thank you, and they send me a couple of dollars. But is it enough to? It's enough to offset paying for the website hosting and things of that nature. Like I say, I haven't. It's part of the hobby more than anything. Am I making a career out of it or making a second income out of it? Not by a long shot.
Well, you're certainly getting a lot of interest. That's great. So let's move into your amateur radio interest. And amateur radio is a big sandbox. And that being said, what interests you the most? Is it DX, digital modes, repeaters? Where are you at right now?
Well, if you had asked me this question about 10 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said DX. I was fortunate. I had one of my houses I had back, it's about 15, 20 years ago, had about 3 acres of property, and about a third of it was cleared. The rest of it was all surrounded by 110 foot oak trees. And I had my ham license, and I figured, I'm going to put these oak trees to good use. I used to get on 20 meters with a simple dipole. And the thing is, that simple dipole was basically, the center of it was up 100 feet in an oak tree, and it was 132 feet of wire on each side. My simple dipole was a 7 dB gain antenna up 100 foot on 20 meters. So my simple dipole, backed by a 1200 watt heat kit amplifier, it would punch a hole through 20 meters. and I loved it. Since then, I've moved to a different house. I'm in a small ranch house now, and small half acre. There's no room to put up antennas. So the interest now is going more to repeaters and DMR. When I started in DMR, I guess about 6-7 years ago, for me to get to a local DMR repeater, I had to go to an outside antenna to hit a repeater up in Harrisburg, about 35 miles away. Right now, I believe there's about 6 repeaters that I can hit with a handheld here locally. I mean, this area from York, Pennsylvania to southern New Jersey and upwards to New York is probably the largest concentration of DMR and digital repeaters in the country. So it's grown a lot, where instead of an outside antenna, now it's mostly a handheld operation. But putting together repeaters, putting together a good repeater, and not just a transmitter receiver, and try to split them apart. I mean, with duplexers and the entire system to do it absolutely right. I put a couple of those on the air, and they work flawlessly. In fact, one of the first repeaters I had put on the air goes back about 40 years ago, where myself and a friend of mine 3 miles away, we wanted to put one up. We set up a split site repeater between our 2 houses. And that was the first repeater in the southern York, Pennsylvania area. And now, like I say, analog, and there's several DMR repeaters, a couple of Fusion. I don't know if there's any D-Star in this area, but DMR is strictly taken over. But right now, I'd say my interest is handhelds and repeaters.
Now, you do a lot with hotspots too, right? So you're with the DMR?
Yes. I started off with I think it was $60. It was one of these kits. I put the Pi-Star kit together, only to find out that after I bought all the little components, I bought the chip and I used Etcher and, put the software on it, only to find out that when I got it, it had a bad board. I fought that thing for about a month and a half. Finally, I got one that was put together and assembled, and it worked. But I went to something with a bigger screen. So I got one of the ones that had a 3-inch Nexian screen on it. And then I got really spoiled, and I picked up a Skybridge.
Yeah, that's an.
And not to promote particular hotspots, but I got to tell you the Skybridges work flawlessly.
Your ham radio and just talking to people. I mean, what has these hotspots done for you as far as the hobby and interest in terms of, you mentioned DX earlier about, making contacts, which is what a lot of DXing is about. And, you've got these hotspots which have just freed the ham radio experience in a way that's unlike any other. If you're not in proximity to repeaters, you get a hotspot and you are just cut loose and you can talk to people all over. I mean, are you seeing that yourself? Like, are you talking to guys, that you would not have otherwise spoken to?
Yes, because both I can see it on my end and I can see it on their end. There's a couple stations I had talked to in South Dakota. Try to find, you can count on your hand how many repeaters there are in the entire state of South Dakota. A hotspot is their only connection to the DMR world. Now, I got one for an opposite reason. There are so many repeaters nearby. In fact, the closest repeater to me, if I look out my window, I can see it, is 1,500 feet away from my house. But we used to get on there in the evening on the nets. And if I'm going to net for an hour, say, with a rag chewing with a bunch of guys for an hour, hour and a half, I would be tying up the repeater in that time slot for an hour, hour and a half at a time. I've got the hotspot to take my traffic off of the local repeater. So even though if I'm on statewide here in Pennsylvania, odds are I'm going to use a hotspot to go on statewide, so I don't tie up the repeater and it's available for someone else, because there's a lot of activity, and I don't want to be the one consuming that activity. So I bought the hotspot. There's two reasons to get a hotspot. One is there's no activity in the area, and the other is if there's too much activity in your area.
Yeah, we're finding that out as well. It definitely it solves two big problems for guys. And one of the things that I'm talking to people I would never have talked to before. I mean, it's kind of been I never have gotten into HF like I should have, but the hotspot and talking on DMR, you can key up a talk group in any state, any country, and there's probably going to be somebody there listening. And it's this argument or I guess it'd be a problem of nobody's on, the repeaters are dead or something like that. That's a non-issue now with these hotspots, because you're now, you're having QSOs with all sorts of folks.
Yes. And the thing is, you can pick and choose. I think it's around 1,500. This is all strictly, I'm talking about the Brandmeister network.
Yeah.
There's others, there's TGIF and several others that are excellent networks. But just for reference, I'll say Brandmeister, because there's 1,500. And if you can't find a talk group, I mean, that's like going to a library and saying, I can't find a book.
Yeah.
There's more there. Like I used to like the worldwide channel. Then I went more to the nationwide. Nationwide right now, it's almost 24/7. In fact, some of the repeaters in the area have taken nationwide and worldwide off, because if it's keyed up, they'll lock up the repeater. Right now, I'm more on statewide channels, and my conversation is, if it's something that's going into technical, whether it's antennas or someone trying to get a hotspot working or DMR, if it's a technical discussion, I'll chime in. Because again, that's my love.
Well, so what's next for you in ham radio?
I've been through. I'm going to give away my age. I've been through the transition of where CW and AM, they had single sideband, came into play. And again, I'm going back to now 1960, and everybody that was on AM said nobody wants to talk to somebody that sounds like Donald Duck. And it's true. I mean, when you're on AM and you listen to that, who wants to go sideband? Then single sideband was the only way to go, until Highway Patrol with Broderick Crawford came out with his 2150 to headquarters. And they say, wow, FM. And I think he was using an old Motorola pack set in the original show. And they said, that's a fad. FM repeaters will never take hold. As you well know, they took hold, and now digital, and people were saying, digital's a fad. It's going to go away. It's not going to go away. Next technology will probably be shooting laser signals at satellites. And I hope I'm around long enough to see it, because if it is, I'll probably put it on the website.
That's awesome. Well, one of the questions I love asking folks is about your superpower. And what I mean by that is, what is one thing that you do really easy? What would you say your superpower is?
Oh, superpower. I'd say debugging, and I'd say debugging things, troubleshooting. If I don't know what the solution to a problem is, I'll research it and find it. I mean, there's this, I guess when I say I like to troubleshoot, I got that from my father way back when. My first car was a junker. It got me to work, and that was about it. My second car was a Corvette. Not that I wanted a big flashy car. It's because a friend of mine had a car for sale. I needed a car, and I bought it. It needed a lot of work, and the price was right. So I picked it up, and then after I bought it, I asked my father, I said, Dad, I have a concern. I said, if anything goes wrong with this car, I don't know if I can afford to fix it. And he said, well, he says, here's what you do. If you take that car to a mechanic, what does he have that you don't have? I says, I don't know, the training and all that. He says, he's got the manual. He says, you go out and buy the manual and you got the same power that he does. And I did. I bought the manuals, and here I am 20 years old, and I'm changing clutches inside the car, dropping transmissions without any experience. I just read the manual and just followed the instructions. So I guess it was not really a superpower, but it's the ability to learn from reading a manual. And it's just my curiosity about what makes things work, what makes it tick. And if I get a project, I'll just dig into it until it's fixed. So I guess my superpower would be the ability to learn and retain what I've learned.
That's an awesome skill to have for sure. And if there was one thing that you have not done, what would it be?
Something I haven't done. I would say if I could do anything, it'd be to time warp into the future. And I don't think anybody's done that one yet, but there's so much out there with electric cars, solar technology. One day I won't see it, but I told my grandson, I said, there will be a day when they'll have solar energy and battery power to the point where the average car will have the solar panel on the roof, and there'll be enough energy coming in from the sun, generate enough power to keep those batteries charged. And will there always be need for a fossil fuel? Well, until they can do that to a lawnmower or a weed whacker or something like that, fossil fuels are going to be around. I mean, horses and trailers are still around. But I would love to see in the future, I would love to see where the technology is going to be. I would love to time warp 20 years from now. And my grandson says it's not going to take 20. You'll see it in 10. Hopefully I'm around in 10 years to see it. But that's what I would love to do. It's something I obviously haven't done, but I'd really love to go into the future for a bit. 10 years, 20 years from now, only for a day at a time. I would love it.
That would be cool. There's a guy right now, Elon Musk, who's trying to do that, trying to, see into the future and create something that's not been done. And yeah, you definitely got an engineer's heart. That's what a lot of people that get into ham radio, they have that, that inner curiosity, to fix things, to troubleshoot. It seems like it's a common theme and a desire in all of us that, we became technologists because we had this, this curiosity about, why things work and of course the future. And a lot of these guys are future casting. And, a lot of this stuff that we're working on has come out of ham radio. A lot of the technology that's, used every day has been developed by some ham somewhere. Or he got his start in ham radio.
I tell you, when it comes to dying now, there's once, I'm going to dig back into, it's just bringing back memories of the past. When I talk about digging into things and making things work, my first transceiver was a tube type. It was made by a company called Swan. It was a Swan 140. That was when the Swan made single band transceivers. Mine was the 40 meter. I'll never forget, I was about maybe 15, 16 years old at the time. And I'm tuning it up on 40 meters, played, dip, peak, dip, got it to 120 milliamps where it should have been. And as I'm tuning it, I could see it crawling little by little. It's like, the final went bad. I said, I know what I'm going to do. I went upstairs. My father had an Olympic television set. It had a 6DQ5. It's a horizontal amplifier. I pulled the tube out of his. I put the soft one in. His TV worked, and I was back on 40 meters. So just curious to see what was inside that TV set. When I found the same component, I would swap it.
That's really cool.
Again, just curiosity. I'm not going to sit there and say, Dad, I need a new tube. I just went around and see where I could find one close to it. But you're making me go back into the memory banks a little bit. It's kind of fun.
Well, if you could summarize your values, your ethics that have guided you to becoming a successful engineer and a ham radio operator, what would they be?
to be, I'm trying to think now. I guess to me, being a successful ham operator is having the ability to, I say that, and I mentioned earlier, it's the license to learn. To get a ham license and have your license for 20 years and repeat the same first year over and over again, that to me, that's really not of value. Sit there and constantly continue to learn. If it's a new technology, don't let it scare you. If you're afraid of digital and you're afraid of code plugs, try it out, work with it. It's not that hard. Keep up with the technology I'd say would be the one thing. I was 14 years old. I had good mentors. As I mentioned, there was older guys that could have said, he's 14 years old. Let him go on his own. He'll learn. They took me under their wing. They helped me build my first transmitter and all. So to me, the website is just passing it forward. The values of the tradition of ham radio has to be passed forward. And like I say, that's the reason why the website came into existence in the first place. And that's why I enjoy the mentoring side. Just my small way of giving back to the hobby.
Well, John, I sure have enjoyed interviewing you and listening to your story. And you are truly a ham radio heavyweight, and you are giving back to the ham radio community with your website. In fact, it is a treasure trove of information. And I want to encourage everybody that's watching to check out Miklor.com. John has done a bang-up job in putting together some reviews on all these radios that you guys are enjoying. And if it's not on there, just give him a shout. He might do a review on a radio you have. He's definitely a giving soul. And again, just check out Miklor.com. Look for him at a ham fest. Hope to meet him at Dayton again here soon. I hope we get back at that. Yeah, absolutely. But John, thank you so much for the time today and talking to me and telling us, telling the viewers your story. You've blessed us, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Ron. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, 7-3.
Take care, 7-3.